Take this off here. Okay, fine. Progress. So we're ready to move.
Ready? All right. Welcome to the September 24th, 2024 meeting of the Youth and Education Committee. My name is John DeRico and I'm chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by Community Coordinator Brian Lafferty. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. As a reminder, New York State law requires all committee members who are not able to attend the meeting in person to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. Members of the public who are here in person, you can raise any questions that you have by raising your hand. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. We still need a minute taker. Dave, as one of the new members, can I volunteer you? And I promise that we can work together on it.
Sure, I'm really quick when I grab a pad.
Oh, yeah. Oh, here's a.
Bigger,
And you can give you. And you know, you can just take it from the video.
oh,
And
Oh, yeah, it's all on YouTube.
so I can just take it out.
Yeah.
Oh, so
And if we have a template too.
we have a new
Easier.
template, yeah.
it's fantastic.
See?
So this is-
Now getting volunteered.
This is homework, nah, okay, got it, okay, thanks, okay.
And thank you very much, and I'm sorry to
Pleasure.
put you on the spot.
It's okay.
So we'll now take attendance by roll call. Brian will conduct the roll call.
Thank you. Committee members, I'll call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. John DeRico,
Present.
thank you. Stu Desser,
Present.
thank you. Kevin O'Keefe,
Present.
thank you. Roberto Ruiz Melendez is not joining us this evening. Olivia Shrednick,
Present.
thank you. Rabia Iqbal,
Present.
thank you. Katie Land. Don't see her yet. David Lee,
Present.
thank you. With 6 of 8 members present, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we'll adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the May 28th, 2024 meeting are being drafted. Once they are ready for the committee's review, they will be sent by the board office. I'm going to very quickly go through the ground rules because we have an in-person presentation today. Basically, no one may speak until granted the floor. If you have a question about committee business, please raise your hand. If you're unable to attend in person, you're attending virtually, please raise your hand through Zoom. Please try to have only one person speak at a time so we can all understand each other. The chat function for committee members present via Zoom should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. Tonight's agenda. We have our first four-legged committee member. Fantastic. Wonderful. Patty? Katie, excuse me. Nice to meet you. We have a wonderful presentation regarding reopening the Turtle Bay Music School. Jeff reached out to me over the summer. We had a conversation. I know it was very dearly loved before it shut down. We'd love to hear about your plans for it. I think you have a presentation here as well.
Okay, thank you very much, John, and to everybody for having me here. Being a little bit old fashioned, I asked my neighbor, who's about 79 years old, where we live now in the Buchanan Building on 3rd and 48th. And she told me I have to come speak at CB6 because of what a wonderful group this is. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. As your new neighbor, my wife and I and our little one on the way have just closed on a place on East 50th here. Since we had the map, I'm going to be using it. So I'm very much like to come tonight in the spirit of asking how it is that my family can best serve this community. As in my case, somebody that's come back from Hong Kong as a leader, if I may say so, in international education, especially in the liberal arts, but also inclusive of the sciences, but also somebody now that's working in medical device consulting, working on change control on this new world that we're all in post-pandemic. So I'm very pleased tonight to introduce some new ideas to restoring a community music school, but perhaps with a more interdisciplinary and a more international framework that's befitting of the United Nations neighborhood. So I know, having represented a lot of, maestri, as they say, the maestros, the conductors and the fancy tuxedos, a lot of times musicians come out of their own self-centered ego to stand on the stage, even under the guise of education. I want to assure everybody that that's not the case here, where I'm coming with the question, how is it that I and perhaps a new Turtle Bay Community Music School can best serve this community? May I just ask, did anybody here per chance attend the old Turtle Bay Community Music School? Okay, well, if we go,
I'm gonna age myself by saying yes, but
okay.
yeah, it was sad to see it go.
Yeah, okay, this is what I've heard a lot. If we just go to the next slide, these are all very informal. It's a tale of two Turtle Bays, if I may put it very briefly. There was this fabulous historic community music school on East 52nd here. I'm going to point at the map since we have it. In between Second and Third Avenue. Others may know it as next door to the Toto Ramen place, which is equally beloved by other members of the community. You can see it's 100, plus year old building at the time that served over the years thousands of music students of all age groups, demographic backgrounds, even though being housed here in Turtle Bay. Many dignitaries, children's went there, leaving all the UN politics aside. And everybody that I've spoken to speaks so fondly of their experiences there, but also saddened to see it go, because as is often the case with not only music schools, but educational institutes in general, it's challenging to keep these buildings up to date with code. There's these funding income gaps between the donations for a nonprofit and what can be raised through the revenues for tuition prices. And sadly to say, if there's not expert management, sometimes confusion can break out. And this one is a casualty of the economic challenges confronting schools like this. So what they tried to do, and I'm going to point to the map again, is as there were some challenges upgrading the building, and correct me where I'm going astray here, as I'm not originally from this area. They tried to move the school just down over here on 38th Street, which is right by the tunnel entrance. And it's not exactly the most, pedestrian friendly area. It's also, a different neighborhood, because once you cross 42nd, the demographics, kind of change. And there's a psychographic, as they say, distance between the original school and this traditional historic building and what was essentially a modern medical office in a basement of a, spectacular new tall high rise. That was not very inviting for a music school. Meanwhile, the pandemic is about, underway. There's also some financial uncertainty related to that. And it's even became embroiled in some of the recent bank failures that we've seen in this country. So long story short, what happened, if we just hit enter again, the music school was demolished, if you can imagine that. This historic piece in a historic neighborhood, not, a historic register building, but a very nice, meaningful place with melodies and memories, and is now replaced by the gray box on the right next to the beloved Toto Ramen. Now, ironically, they called the condo building on the right the Minuet, Now, a minuet is like an old dance from like the 1800s. If you know the tune. Do, 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 do. Okay, gosh, I'm trying to be a music teacher. I'm singing off tone at the end of a long day. Excuse me. In any case, they named it after that, but it's not exactly a building that's going to seem very inviting. And nevertheless, a place that's going to, make you dance along going by it. So this is what's been replaced. It's kind of a sad fact of the communities as they grow in affluence, real estate values go up. Unfortunately, some of the educational buildings can fall by the wayside and be replaced by more expensive, revenue generating, condo buildings, while the music educators, the artists are, moving on to Brooklyn and Queens and so forth. So in any case, that's my long and short of it. There was a, New York Times article in more detail, about the great tradition at this place, but also, the sad downfall to it. Nonetheless, as I'm walking around Turtle Bay, I'm reminded by all of the rich, history among not just the musicians, but the famous architects, writers, and other people that have lived here. So if we go on the next slide, I'm wondering, and am reminded of, say, this house on the left, which is on 49th Street, which is one of the few houses in the Tudor style that's not in Tudor City. It's breathtaking just to walk down on 49th Street. And as I look at this, I'm reminded all the time of my own teachers growing up, because this was the house of a famous musician named Ephraim Zimbalist, who was a Jewish refugee from East Europe, around the World War I time. And he was one of the most famous violin players in this, country, in the world, 100 years ago. And he went on to become the president of the most exclusive school of higher education in the world, which is the Conservatory of Music in Philadelphia, called the Curtis Institute, which you have a better chance of getting into MIT than you do at the school that this person, Ephraim Zimbalist, became in charge of. So what we see on the left is a house that's, spectacular Tudor architecture. If you look up close over the gate, over the front door, you can see a musical emblem that's got a quote from Mendelssohn on it. And this house symbolizes everything about the highest quality of excellence in Western classical music, to the point of, only if you were going to be performing at Carnegie Hall, were you like invited in here. Meanwhile, on the other side of the neighborhood, on the south side, there's the Ford Foundation, where my other teacher, who was commissioned by the Ford Foundation as part of its commitment to social justice, to write a new book on music during the height of the civil rights movement in the 60s, to make sure that music education was more reflective of the demographics of America, was more inclusive of all the populations in our country, and accessible as well. If this sounds familiar, it's because we've made the same mistake that we made recent years, as we made in the early 90s, as it seems to be cyclical. And so I see in this neighborhood the same tensions that have been playing out in education over the past few years in our country. And certainly this is a locus point that not only represents the best, but also the very center for rectifying some of these challenges as well. So every time I walk in this neighborhood, I'm reminded of all the great teachers I had, as I have children on the way too. And I'm sure you, if you have children or family, or will eventually one day, you want the best teachers for them as well. So now at this moment, at a period coming out of the pandemic, crises in the country over education, it seems to me imperative that we build on our great, traditions, and that this neighborhood's able to lead the way. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to just raise the question, well, where is it that a new Turtle Bay Music School, community music school, would fit among all the many other types of music schools in this city? The fact of the matter is, New York City, even though we lost one historic school, remains the arts capital of the country, if not the world. So if you did not, say, study at the Turtle Bay Community Music School way back when, you may have studied at the East 3rd Street Music Settlement, which is actually now on 11th Street here, which is the longest running community music school in the country at this point. At the other side of the spectrum, there's the 92nd Street Y, which is equally venerable. And then if you go across town to the Lincoln Center, there's a community music school there, wonderful ones going up in Washington Heights, et cetera, et cetera. There are schools for music everywhere. So the question then is why, or how is it that a school for, music can fit itself back into what is an intrinsically competitive, but also still a productive and robust system throughout the city? What I'm going to suggest and appreciate your advice tonight is that it seems to me, looking at having reviewed all the community music schools throughout the city, there remains a consistent emphasis on what we might describe as the Western classical tradition. People can learn the piano, violin, clarinet, maybe a bit of jazz, maybe there's an occasional world instrument with some dance along the side. But the fact of the matter remains that this is still not, despite all the claims towards equal representation and opportunity that we've heard about in the past few years, this is still vastly underrepresentative of the many communities that not only reside in this city, but that people that, grow up and live here may encounter throughout the world. So what I'm going to propose then is that a new community music school for music in the Turtle Bay area, being situated at the crossroads between the United Nations, right down the street, we love them every September, and the financial capital of the world, as all those, banners advertise, that the new school is going to be reflective and take advantage of this unique location that you cannot get anywhere else in the world. So if we go to the next slide, I'd just like to briefly outline what it is I'm thinking. That we're not just going to be teaching as most, music schools do. Here's your lessons on piano, you can play string quartets or jazz bands, rather than just culminating in music performance. And as I gathered from a lot of the stakeholders of the original school, they were very focused on having their children have a competitive advantage for college admissions. We're going to be focusing on learning through music some other integral skills that one needs for life development, especially intercultural diplomacy, since we're in the United Nations neighborhood. So there are about 200 nations represented in the world. There's 800 languages spoken in New York City, including dialects, across the 5 boroughs. And yet, most of the countries in the world do not play the piano. Most of the countries in the world do not have a violin. It's okay to play the piano, it's great to play the violin and so forth, but this does not actually help learn the culture, the other cultures in the world, if you can only represent yourself. So what I would recommend is that a new school is going to have exposure, just like they have at the UN during this period, to all the different, dresses and garbs that people will wear to represent their country. It's the same with the music instruments as well. And you don't necessarily even need to just have them all come to Turtle Bay, because you can go throughout this whole city of New York to treat New York as the campus. The locus may be here, but it's next to Grand Central, which gives you access to anywhere. I asked a colleague at the WCTUN, which is the nonprofit, does the art installations at the UN Plaza on 47th. I said, have you ever gone up to Little Yemen in the Bronx? She said, I didn't know there's a Little Yemen in the Bronx. I said, well, I wanted to learn about Yemeni music. People fled these Houthi rebels in southern the Arabian Peninsula. I can't find a single school, including CUNY, that has somebody that represents a population in the hundreds of thousands here. That's one way that music can, inspire intercultural diplomacy. When New York City goes to North Korea, for example, they send the New York Philharmonic, but the New York Philharmonic plays, Beethoven. They don't learn how to play Korean music or play Korean or show that they're learning it, for example, in the detail that you could in certain contexts here. By interdisciplinarity, I'm referring to the fact that we're next to the financial capital of the world. Many of the constituents in this neighborhood are walking westward to Wall Street, metaphorically speaking. It's the ability to connect music to what's going on in banking is essential as we're trying to promote financial literacy, and home economics, from whichever age. So when we think about, say, Beethoven again, Beethoven lived through several bank failures in his lifetime, just as we have in the past 2 years. He lived through currency devaluations. Most of the people immigrating to New York City have gone through currency devaluations and are relying on our financial system and the dollar. There are ways to really, make these types of connections through music education, and yet it's not done while somebody is just merely teaching, say, piano playing. And I'm not disparaging piano teachers or violin teachers at all. They're wonderful, but there's so much more to it than that, especially in this day and age where parents are expecting a return on investment for their, hard-earned tuition dollars. Likewise, for all the healthcare providers a bit north in Lenox Hill, music is used as a means for medicine in many cultures. In Chinese culture, they have their own form of music therapy, which we've been developing here. Prior attempts to reform the Turtle Bay Music School, we're definitely looking at incorporating music therapy a lot more in that regards too. Technology, many community music schools tend to abstain from digital transformation and questions of AI. Traditional classical musicians are kind of afraid of technology, the proverbial, it's going to take our jobs or something like that. But we have, Silicon Alley right here by, Madison Square. So if somebody, is trained in digital technology through learning music to improve their coding skills and so forth, this seems to me a very important area that can again make Turtle Bay very unique in its offerings. Well, these are just some of the ideas. The last one I'm going to mention are handling some of the demographic changes that we're having as many cultures are now moving not only to CB6, but throughout the city. They're coming from cultures that have not necessarily embraced piano, violin, clarinet, and they continue to play their instruments. Our ability to show that we can learn, their music is one way of, being more inclusive of a society. But within this neighborhood itself, it's going to be very imperative that, as I was mentioning at the very beginning about my neighbor, the elderly, they used to be able to take lessons there too. They're certainly not going to take the subway up to 92nd Street or go too far. It's imperative that the community music school remain in walking distance, not only for after school activities, but also for those that are, retirees that are, looking to either brush up on something, an instrument they played before, or take up a new instrument, later in life. And to do this in such a way where the students are also teachers, maybe the younger children can also be teaching the grandparents, so to say, in the neighborhood. So in any case, these are just some of the ideas that I would like to present and get the community board's feedback. I mean, I say this having trekked up and down Third Avenue, which, as we all know, it remains a bit bleak compared to a lot of the other commercial corridors in the city. We have a glut of, Class B commercial real estate. When I've asked some of the real estate agents, they say not even the banks will take the keys back at this point. When I went to hear Keith Powers and the city controller, Lander speak the other week, they're making plans to convert some of these buildings as pilot examples. On 47th, there's one that will be the first pilot. Others are paving the way to be demolished. But if you look at how the arts have been able to rejuvenate distressed areas, whether it's Red Hook in Brooklyn with all those old abandoned warehouses, which are now, very exciting and a big draw for not only, IKEA, but also all the artists and attractions that have come to Red Hook. It's the same thing that can be done with the commercial buildings as well. We've seen this through a program called Arts on the Avenue by a wonderful educator named Barbara Anderson, who has put visual arts in these buildings. And she actually is reporting that the owners of these buildings are so sad that they don't want to see the artists leave. They're begging them to stay after having, complained that they weren't getting any rent for all of these installations. There's added value that can come through the performing arts through to these buildings. And one area I'd like to explore is the possibility of converting these, knowing that it's been done before through certain case examples, that even a sterile looking 1960s office tower can actually be converted into an effective, art school, if just given some minimal resources to do it. But I also do not want to neglect, on a final note, one of the most important things for education, I think going forward as a whole, the city can consider this as well. And that is, if we just push enter, I'm going to propose that a lot of the teaching for music in particular needs to be done at home. And there's a simple reason for this. In most of the world's cultures, the idea of studying music in a building where you go into a building, bring your instrument, have like a little office, studio for your lesson, is completely foreign and at odds with how music is taught. If we're really going to be part of the United Nations neighborhood, when you learn music in, say, India, for example, you join what they call a gharana, which literally means a family. And that family atmosphere can only be cultivated by becoming a member of the family in their home. New York City actually advantages in-home music lessons through, various tax benefits, which make it more economical, especially in an era where there's high risk with real estate at the moment. This is a very pragmatic solution, and it's also one that enables not only having a home base in Turtle Bay with a building where people can go to, but also being able to access the music of all the cultures of the world throughout the whole city, if we only recognize that education is mostly taught at home for most of the cultures in the world. So these are some of the ideas I'm proposing. I realize I've perhaps spoken a bit over time. You have to forgive me. I am an old school liberal arts professor. We can just drone on and on and on. But I hope I'm presenting some ideas that can potentially position Turtle Bay as a world leader in not only music education, but also a type of lifelong education and learning that is becoming all the more essential in a rapidly changing world. So what I could really appreciate through CB6 is not only knowing how it is that I can best serve this community, but also understanding better the bureaucracy for getting things done in this city. Growing up in Philly, I thought we were complicated. Turns out to be nothing compared to New York City. If there are ways that I can get in touch with the owners of these buildings and present that case, if there are other people in your networks that say, wait, that's a visionary, educator, those two might go, along together, that would be wonderful as well. But in any case, I've droned on long enough, and I thank you very much for hearing my vision for what a new Turtle Bay Community Music School might look like.
No, that's fantastic, and thank you for coming in today. We're gonna open it up to the committee. I just had a question to perhaps kick us off. It seems to me, and this might be a misapprehension, that the instructors will be critical to this vision, especially in sort of a non-traditional space with the slide with many different intersectional approaches. I'm curious sort of where you are in the process of securing or researching possible instructors, because I assume it would also have to be not only pretty varied in terms of experience, but there must be, I think, probably a high volume of instructors required for a project like this, if they're going to be going to people's homes as well.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I have several avenues of inquiry already going for this. First and foremost, I'd like to reconsider the notion of a music instructor. It's not just somebody that only teaches piano. It may be somebody, for example, who is a neuroscientist that is also an expert on Korean culture as represented in China, who studied music as a double major, including music education during their undergraduate. Now you're saying, what type of person is that? They're a professor at Columbia University that just lives not far off the block. Now they can't do this full time, obviously, but somebody like that being able to just take a little bit of time would be an enormous resource. But it is true, the number of people that, fit this bill, it's a bit futuristic, and I'm very well aware of this. I know coming from a background at the New England Conservatory in Boston, that everything the Ford Foundation said in 1960, we're going to train multicultural musicians that do other disciplines and can best serve the communities. The universities didn't buy into it. Therefore, we're a rare breed. So I know people I can call up in Boston. Some of our former colleagues and students are here in New York. But the fact of the matter is, who are going to be the teachers? In many ways, they're going to be the students coming out of this. It's going to be an intergenerational project, to be sure. So one thing I'm also reconsidering is, what is the idea of paying tuition for a music lesson? Usually you say go in, and in this neighborhood, it's going to be over $100 given the cost. But what if that person that pays the tuition, or the parent, that is, the person that's learned over the course of a year is then paid a portion of that, or a tranche, as they would call it, in financial terms, to then go out and teach what they've learned to another community member, even though they may not be the expert that's going to go to Carnegie Hall or something, they still can teach as, an apprentice. And this is something I fear that the community music schools have not leveraged to the capability that they should. If you're like my brother, you studied at a school like this, you played viola so you could get into Yale. They needed violas at the Yale Orchestra. Won't help you anymore today. The Supreme Court said that logic that they need an oboe player at Harvard won't help you. Nowadays, you need to know more things, but then you drop it afterwards. That's not the type of learning we want to be encouraging. So converting the students into teachers as part of the process is going to be very important as well. But let's not forget, we are in New York City, and the fact of the matter is that the city is, despite my having presented some, opportunities for growth, is also the most, international, multicultural city in the world. And there are many students that are studying music education that will need an opportunity like this from CUNY, from, Fordham and other colleges as well. So that's definitely one other avenue for developing the teachers. I hope I'm giving you some suggestions in answer to that question, but it's very clear to me that the concentration of teachers that can only do one thing in music, while common in most all other community music schools, it might be best to create a niche in which you have teachers that are accomplished in multiple disciplines and can donate some of their times to this. I can think of a very, important school up in Connecticut where they don't have any full-time teachers. They only have CEOs of other companies that are teaching the students of all age groups, so that they have high-quality teachers that are professional experts in their own areas that are committed to teaching as well. So that's the type of pedigree I would be thinking and looking towards.
I really appreciate the very comprehensive answer. I have several other questions, but I don't want to hog it in the committee if anyone else has questions.
I do, but I'd let you hog first.
Oh, thank you. So just to be clear, are you picturing, it sounds like you're picturing no dedicated space for this, and it's more like a network of these multidisciplinary instructors that would go to people's homes.
I really appreciate this question, because in an ideal world, we will have a space for it. But the real estate risk for schools of performing arts like this is high, and it results in that catastrophe we saw happen with a historic building. So while I would love to have a space, and I would love it if I can sit down with one of the owners of these underutilized, buildings on Third Avenue and explain through case studies elsewhere in the world how just designating 1 or 2 floors for a new school might be able to boost their building's value again. The fact of the matter is, not only should we be prepared not to have a space, but it's imperative, economically speaking, to be the most inclusive institution for education, that we are networking throughout the city. One thing I didn't talk too much about is what they call the Andy Warhol economy. It's how Andy Warhol, whose studio used to be on 47th here behind that big Dane Hogg Tower, is demolished now. But when New York City was in another period of economic crisis in the 70s and early 80s, it's a great historical story. He single-handedly rejuvenated, especially, you know, the Lower East Side and East Village, simply by using this artistic, creative mindset and connecting it with every single imaginable discipline, industry, whatever it could be. There was no like siloing of, you know, visual arts, music. It was all interrelated and they were all growing. But for that to happen, there has to be networking. And networking, as we all know, just from our own professional developments in terms of getting things done and getting in New York City, is not only essential for success, but also for including, you know, the various, you know, populations in the outer boroughs as well. So it seems to me essential that the building will be, the school would be decentralized. And instead of just going to a building on 52nd Street, you are going to occasionally say, go to the Sri Lankan community on Staten Island. But to do that, you have to go past the Albanian Muslim population in Sri Lanka, around the Sri Lankan population in Staten Island as well. And the opportunities for learning and all the musicians you'll meet through that are so much more rich and variegated than if you were to just be concentrated at, say, the Lincoln Center.
Thank you. Stu, do you wanna jump in?
First of all, I very much appreciate connections between different disciplines. I think the science historian was James Burke, who had that series called Connections. Which is the way I think everything should be taught, you know, the connection between science and politics and the arts. I think that's a better way to learn. It makes it more interesting. And so I appreciate that. I like the idea that music is simply the core of a broader academic scholarship. And I think that's what would attract people to this. I don't understand how it can happen without a dedicated space, without a performance space, without a space where you would attract people to come, where you could demonstrate what's happening, where people can gather collectively. And as a community board, I mean, I think we want to see you in a space. I mean, whether it's shared with the theater, that doesn't use the space during the day or something like that.
Yeah. Let me tackle this question of space a little bit more. I am in no way underplaying the critical role that a central space for a school to come together plays. But there are other spaces, especially when it's not necessarily economically viable to just build a new school in one of the most expensive districts in the whole country. We have to look at the buildings we have. We have to look at the new ones that are going up in different ways, especially, has anybody here lived in Asia? When I lived in Hong Kong and Singapore and commuted all over East Asia, the way they build their buildings with maximum density, but with inbuilt educational centers where not only the residents, but other people can come into them, creates a whole different type of space. And the developers that are coming here and refitting some of these old buildings are coming from Singapore. The new buildings in, you know, Long Island City and Queens, they're developed in the model of Asian, you know, high rises. So these buildings are actually providing spaces for education that can host lots of different activities coming to them. Is that the same as having your own place where everyone else can go to? Of course not, but there is this inbuilt aspect that's a bit foreign to Americans that are used to, say, you know, walking 5 blocks to school or getting on the school bus or, you know, going to school. It's a different way where school is coming to you. But also another thing is we have so many different religious institutions in this neighborhood and elsewhere too. Obviously learning religious tolerance through music is essential, especially with what's been going on in the world in recent years. religious institutions are naturally will provide for this. And some of the tuition dollars can be used to, pay the rent for religious facilities so they can manage their upkeep and not see the same fate that this, historic building saw. So I hope I'm answering this question about space,
And
but I do
do public
appreciate it.
schools, have some kind of discounted access for programs like this?
I wonder, I was gonna ask if we looked into sort of community partnerships. I was originally thinking of it, I think kind of what you're getting at too, from a financial perspective. As well as the extent to which there's city grants available for this. I was just curious, and Stu raised a great point too. To what extent you've looked at of sort of like the core. I mean, in my mind, there's a certain financial foundation that's necessary for this, just to get off the ground.
Yeah.
It can come through partnerships, potentially with local schools, like student noted, it could come through city grants potentially. I'm just curious, to what end you can explore that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to brag at all, but I am a pretty accomplished grant recipient and writer. So I love doing that work. In terms of partnerships, absolutely, I've looked at them. One of the challenges with providing a more visionary type of school like this is that especially for the music programs in public schools that are already underserved and are maintaining more traditional, we have orchestra, we have band, and we have choir. If they're lucky, and if they're in a neighborhood that can afford it, they can kind of feel a little bit threatened by somebody coming in from the outside with a somewhat bombast type of revision type of school. So in that regards, I think the way the Turtle Bay Community Music School was connected, was partnered with them, but its own independent entity where people could come after school if they wanted to, take music lessons. That seems to me to be the best framework with respect to the public schools. That said, as part of the school's commitment, yes, absolutely, the teachers, and then as I'm including the student teachers, as I'm calling them, should also get, DOE certification so that they can be contracted into the New York City public schools. More logical connection would be the international schools, for example, the United Nations School, which is, in the 30s on the waterfront. Much to my surprise, their music program is exclusively Western classical music, despite the fact that it's the United Nations School. You cannot learn the Indian veena, a nice big instrument with, pumpkin gourds and, all these mythological things and just so many spectacular musical cultures throughout the world. So there's also an aspect where it's great to partner with those, but what I would see is an independent entity that can circulate among them, especially all the different international schools and the missions or consulates, to the UN and for the countries in this neighborhood as well. So while it's possible to think of, say, having a home base as a after-school program in a public school, it seems to me that it may potentially cause more friction than may be ideal, but certainly an avenue worth exploring in more detail.
I do wonder if, have you looked at higher education at all? Because I wonder if a school like NYU that has, next to unlimited resources, I would imagine at least has a more global footprint. I don't know if that extends to the music realm or the arts more generally. But I almost wonder if this could be right for some sort of like clinical or experiential course there, especially with the aspect of student teachers.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And to give more context, and if I'm droning on, please just interrupt me. Higher education, yes, of course, certainly teachers, teachers in training can come through that route. And that's one of the best ways to undertake the critical aspects of evaluation to maintain funding, to have the clinical professors reviewing it. However, speaking as a professor myself, I know that right now the liberal arts and the humanities are thoroughly distressed in this country, and that we need to think of new ways, because the learning that's necessary for lifelong learning is not necessarily going to be limited to, say, a 4-year curriculum, whether it's NYU, CUNY, whatever the school may be. And it's most critically not inclusive of all of the types of communities here, because the, final bill for NYU at the end of the day is simply not affordable for many people in this city, and continues to be a barrier to entry for other areas, that are important to learn from as well. So again, while I see it as important to collaborate there with higher education, in this case, I'm following closely the work of an NYU sociologist who founded what they're calling a heterodox academy with the slogan, "Great minds don't always think alike." They're working very hard at NYU to address matters of polarization that we're all familiar with now in this country, so that people can learn to talk with others across divides. And for me, that's really the most important thing, that can also be, taught through music, where you're learning music from other cultures that may sound weird on, the first time, but actually maybe you'll like it if you give it a second try, and things like that. Yeah, so absolutely. I'm sure that the universities would be an important partner as well, but that, if we're to truly include, all the demographics of the city, especially all the age groups that may not want to be going back to college, but were, actively studying music on 52nd Street, that again requires a little bit of independence.
Very, very fair point. I do want to open it up again to the committee. If there's any questions.
How would you address financial access to instruments and musical things?
Okay. That's a wonderful question. My opinion, being in a financially savvy family with a spouse that spends all day on Wall Street and, screaming at the computer when working from home, is that the notion of paying for music lessons or any extracurricular activities is probably due to be reconsidered, especially when you're dealing with some of the most financially savvy and smart, banking folks in the world who call this area home or a home away from home. So I would like to explore deeper the ideas of how the tuitions are paid for lessons. And I would like to be able to sit down with consultants and not only nonprofits, but for-profits, public benefit corporations, and rethink about how it is that, say, if you were to pay me, say, $100 for a lesson, how is it that maybe I can pay you later $40 to go teach that lesson to somebody else, say in Queens? And maybe that $100 can be broken down a little bit more. If you're sending children to school these days, I've never heard parents in my whole lifetime or my parents' generation mention ROI for education before. The need for a return on investment was always assumed. So now we're thinking that maybe out of that $100 that a music lesson may cost, maybe $10 of that actually needs to be put into an investment fund. And that's got 10%, can maybe be contributed to a 529. Maybe it's going to go into emerging markets and materialize, 20 years later for somebody's college or something like that. Or, we can get into more fancier, terms and so forth. There's been experiments using these cryptocurrencies, but they weren't thinking ahead because now our SEC is cracking down on them. So there's been interesting things. How is it that we're going to, reformulate music as a, product, but also as a service, as education? So I haven't totally worked out, those things yet, but I'm very eager, to sit down with folks in this neighborhood and see how we can rethink about that, because the price, and especially paying for lessons on top of everything else, is, challenging even if you're upper middle class, but also prohibitive if you're not. As for instruments, this is an interesting question. Many people are able to bring them with them, but others, have not. The Metropolitan Museum has a spectacular collection of instruments from throughout the world that are not on display, in addition to those that are. So one thing that could be, of interest is to use what we actually have in this city. But if we don't have You know, the instruments that people are able to bring with them. When I came back from China, I brought a humongous instrument called the Guqin, which is what Confucius played. You know, if they didn't have the luxury of being able to bring that, then I'm sure that's going to have to be, you know, part of the fundraising to, you know, make sure that we can get those as well. But I'm not pretending that we're going to have absolutely, you know, everything on day one. What I can say though, is that understanding that music is used as a means of international diplomacy a lot. I have no doubt that many countries will be eager to donate some of their instruments, especially in the United Nations neighborhood, as you know, a means of, you know, generosity to, you know, reflect the benevolence of the country. Certainly it raises issues as well. I know a lot of the music instruments provided for in the New York City school system are actually donated via China, for example, where all the music instrument factories are, but now that raises, you know, other tensions. But that's certainly one avenue to go forward through for learning, for providing all these different types of instruments.
Any other questions? This keeps sounding, at least to me, more and more like a good fit for government funding, whether on the local level or above. How can we be useful to you?
I think what would be most useful for me then, if your recommendation, John, and everybody's experience here, if you're saying the best thing that this could maybe be, you know, eligible or even competitive for government funds, and I understand how limited they are, especially having written applications for the DCLA, excuse me, you know, which presents, you know, artistic activities at venues throughout the city. I would really love, you know, to sit down and talk a little bit more about, you know, how to make that type of application as competitive as possible, especially somebody that is eager, but not a, you know, expert in the New York scene. But I'm also curious to hear you say that because a lot of us educators, especially coming out of the system, have also been preparing, as I've been alluded, to prepare to work around government bureaucracy and limited funds, and to recognize that it's possible that instead of seeking government funds, it may actually be more sensible to set up an investment club and run this through private equity. But these are, again, the funding questions about how would you do this? The assumption is that music is something that, you know, the economists at Princeton, where I did my PhD. My PhD is from Princeton, but my MBA is from Baruch in this neighborhood. The economists at Princeton very clearly show how the costs of, you know, general living are going up and up and up, you know, but the ability of, you know, the performing arts, you know, stagnated. So to be perfectly honest, while it's imperative that a school like this is working to address it, we also recognize that it is, you know, somewhat of a situation where it cannot simply be relying on, say, government funding or traditional nonprofit fundraising, because the result of that, sadly, is a demolished, you know, building. And we've seen it time and time again. It just happened last summer with the Brooklyn Community School of Music. Funding crunch, historic building. We need to raise $100,000. We have to find a way not to get, you know, stuck in that. And when I speak with, you know, people from the government that are weighing, you know, in cultural economics, they always ask the question, well, what about the Haitians? Literally, I mean, the country Haiti right now is falling apart. We have immigrants coming from that country, Brooklyn, now even been smeared in the last presidential debate in other parts of the country. Somebody in the government needs to make the choice between giving money for somebody that lives in a very wealthy part of East Manhattan, access to music lessons that will make it throughout the city, and offering more services to those that are fleeing refugee, crises in throughout the world that are coming here for a better opportunity. So all these types of trade-offs, I think I'm an expert writer with, but if you think it's eligible for government support and can best support the city, I'd love to sit down and discuss in more detail how, while at the same time preparing not to, you know, receive government funding if they're not able to.
Yeah, I am certainly not an expert.
Yeah.
Especially not in government funding. thank you so much for your time tonight, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Let's definitely keep talking. You're welcome to stay if you like.
Yeah, sure.
We'd love to have you. Otherwise, you'll be able to leave off camera, so don't. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the rest of our agenda, I'm actually gonna go a little bit out of order, both for the sake of time. And actually, no, just for the sake of time. So we have several new members here today. Virtually none of which I've met before tonight, which is my fault, so apologies. I'm wondering if we could just briefly introduce yourself and maybe a sentence or two about your background, and what you're hoping to see out of this committee in the coming year. Do you want to pick us off?
Sure, my name's Asia Vickers. I'm really just coming to visit. I saw the agenda and noticed that there was concerns around youth and technology, and I'm a psychotherapist and I'm a leadership consultant and executive coach. And so I work locally in New York in a private practice, and then I also travel to DC often. So more like volunteering to kind of see what's happening and how I can help.
My name is Dave Levy. I'm a new member of the community board. I work as a rabbi at the Sutton Place Synagogue on 51st between 2nd and 3rd, just a block from the old Turtle Music School. And my background before being at the synagogue there, I joined about 2 years ago, was working with students on college campus and in high school youth movements. So of the committees available, this seemed appealing in terms of my previous work.
And I'm Katie Landa. I'm a new member of the community board. And in terms of education, I was a teacher, social studies teacher, middle school and high school for about 10 years. And I recently finished a PhD in social policy. And my dissertation really looked at how public policy around immigration and education and the way schools are structured affected the access of immigrants' children to education entitlements. And I've also worked in the area of, I worked with 8 states that were trying to improve their systems for transitioning youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities from high school to competitive integrated employment and post-secondary education and community living. So I guess that's it. And I moved back to New York a couple of years ago, so I'm kind of relearning New York City too. So, and the things that I'm really interested in here, I know that, well, I just saw that Brad Lander released a letter saying that the city is really not moving forward appropriately on reducing class size in accordance with the state mandate. And as a former teacher and also like the education research I've done, I think, the ratio of teachers and students is critically important. So I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in what happens to immigrants' children in city schools. The other thing, the Landers was also released a report looking at opportunities to further integrate schools while reducing class size. And I think so integration in classrooms and within the schools is also something that I think is tremendously important. I think, free breakfast and lunch for students has been an important issue. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, Brad's been busy.
Yeah.
I read the class size letter, and I actually think it's a great issue for this committee, potentially for a resolution endorsing it. Is that something you'd be interested? You can either exploring in the first instance, or we can connect on it separately.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm informally assigning you to that on my super official notes here, so.
Okay, and then
Formalized
also
forever.
the issue of, of families not being able to stay in shelters and children having to either change schools or travel long distances to schools. I think that's a really important.
Yeah, we passed a resolution on that, earlier this year, brought some great speakers on it. It's tough because like as a community board, we're a little limited in our ability to actually like coerce elected change. Speaking of Mr. Lander, he did a great, audit of the mayor's 30-day and 60-day policies. As to the 30-day policy, I think around 2 or 3 months ago, the mayor entered into a settlement with legal aid. That I frankly was pretty unsatisfactory, I think, for everyone. I think it's gonna be like an issue of administration change at this point, to be frank. Which maybe is coming, who knows? I know that, we have to go through the budget requests. Should we just bite the bullet? Let's do it.
Okay.
So there's a new initiative. Hope we can do this as quickly as possible so we can get back to substantive stuff. We have to evaluate the impact, community support and feasibility of our budget requests. My recollection is that we have, I think, 2 requests outstanding. One we closed out from the prior year regarding security infrastructure at a school. I have to submit, I think, a short report to our budget committee. I keep looking at Brian because I'm hoping he's going to tell me I'm saying the right things. I have to submit a short report to our budget committee listing, I think, our requests.
So, the purpose of discussing the requests, is to see what we want to keep, what we might want to add. And I think, I have a spreadsheet I can pull up so we can discuss them collectively.
Yeah, if you don't mind pointing them out, that'd be great. Just give some sort of visual reference. And just to give the new members a little bit of context, so I think we discussed this at our last meeting before the summer recess. And I'm still a little reticent to bring on any new requests because the ones we've had have been outstanding for a period of time. A period of time that exceeds years, I think, at this point. So I would love to close these out this year before bringing on anything new. Maybe we can adjust it so it's a little easier to read.
Just large those. So, first request here is, a bit the big side.
Yeah.
More school services for homeless students.
It's a great, yeah, we have to narrow this though, I think.
Yeah.
Saying,
So. Some expense requests. In our board currently, essentially the reasoning behind it is 1 out of every 8 children in New York City experiences homelessness before the 5th grade. And so, as we know, there's several elementary schools, as the committee has discussed in the past, experiencing rates of students in temporary housing as high as 27%. These schools include institutions in neighboring community districts. Difficult to see. See.
I wonder if we could target a specific school in our district. For additional funds explicitly geared at either meal services, like you mentioned, Katie, or something else that would be beneficial to this population.
Yeah, and here you can see the responses that we received in the past fiscal years. Request requires further study.
And I'm sorry to interject. Is this DOE that's giving these responses?
So the agency is DOE, yes, for this request.
It's
Sorry.
DHS.
Yes, my
DHS. Oh,
apologies.
thanks.
I scrolled down too far. So, as I said, the most recent one was, the request requires further study. Fiscal year 23, the agency continually works with provider organizations to enhance services that are working successfully, identifying best practices and expanding those services are ideal. 22, the agency will try to accommodate within existing resources, and then 21. DYCD has increased funding in the service area. The request has already been funded. DYCD has added several hundred beds in residential crisis and transitional independent living programs for runaway and homeless youth ages 16 to 21. And the agency also has awarded contracts for new programs that will serve ages 21 to 24. However, homeless children receive services from the Department of Homeless Services and the Administration for Children's Services. DYCD partners with those agencies to help their clients access DYCD services such as after-school programs and summer jobs. And DYCD is not the agency responsible. So you can see that initially it was geared towards DYCD. And then more recently it's been geared towards DHS. DHS is the agency.
Yeah, I do agree we need to sharpen this a little bit. And subject to thoughts from anyone else, which are very, very welcome. I would suggest that, I mean, even just, it's rough, but just looking at the largest public schools. I don't know if there's publicly available statistics about homeless populations at the schools. It seems like that'd be something that'd be difficult to measure at the outside. I think it's too vague as compared.
And if, why is it going through DHS instead of DOE?
Yeah, great question.
I mean, we're, well,
Yeah,
that's
Brian,
part of
why?
the focus question.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
if-
Can we reach out to the agency with clarifying questions like that? Are they receptive to that, or?
Yes, we can.
No, I think part of what happens is that there are different pieces of legislation that fund different programs for homeless families and children and youth. And so, you know, under each legislation, like funds a different type of public agency. So I think the trick is to have those agencies really coordinate with one another so that they can, you know, use their funds in the most beneficial way.
That would be a trick, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, agencies coordinate.
Yeah. And the other confusing thing, like just about counting numbers of homelessness, is that different pieces of legislation have different definitions of homelessness. So that there are all like different counts of who's homeless that don't align across the different agencies even, so.
If anyone's interested in sort of running with this, they're more than welcome to.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
What is the ask of the committee in this framework here, in terms of the budget?
Yeah, it's one I've been trying to figure out myself. So the immediate issue is that by September 30th, we need to sort of rank and vet our own budget requests. I mean, this one has been pending since, I mean, like years before I joined the community board. I think, I don't know if this is the right tack, but part of me is tempted to scrap it and try to come up with something that's achievable and fixable. I don't know if that's frowned upon or even possible.
No,
That would certainly be a vote and not a unilateral decision.
I wouldn't frown.
Well, if you would smile.
No, I'm not no for that either.
But I don't know. I mean, look, it's been pending for 4 years. It's kind of, in my eyes, it's like asking for like sunshine on a cloudy day. It's a great thing, but it needs to be actionable. I do want to emphasize that this is very much a decision for us as a unit that we should vote on, and thoroughly discuss before dropping.
I guess, well, I'm not really completely clear on the ask that you raised. And so is it just a ask for specific funds to a specific school or just generally, I guess I'm still curious what they ask for, because I'm thinking about like, this might be a dumb question, but in terms of discretionary funds, being able to ask for discretionary funds from Congress members, like I guess I'm wondering where might that be an ask? So one, it's like, what's the ask? And two, is there a reason that these are the specific agencies that the committee is requesting money for, or are there any other avenues that the committee is looking to get funds from?
Yeah, two great questions. The first is, I think that's actually the right way to think about it, like the discretionary pool of funds, except in the local government context. So one of our functions as a community board is to make these types of requests on behalf of neighborhood stakeholders. And the idea is that we sort of act as a conduit to fund emergent and existing neighborhood issues. So 4 years ago, this committee proposed, and the budget committee gave a thumbs up to this request. The request is, as written, provide more services for homeless folks.
It's so broad and vague. I mean, I'm like,
Yeah.
sorry, I couldn't
No,
see all
yeah.
the
Oh, yeah, it's a little, it's hard to see on the screen, but and that's why I'm reacting, I'm like, it needs to be very concrete. I think this request is actually unusually vague and broad. For example, other requests have been, update the security system at PS 116, which is very tangible. There's a specific location, I think I'm actually not even doing the request justice. There are specific aspects of the security system they want to fix. Another example would be like repair pothole out on 32nd and 3rd on the west side near the sidewalk on the north corner, like stuff like that. They won't all be able to get to that level of specificity, I don't think, but again, I do think this one is unusually vague. I forgot the second part of your question. I'm not sure I addressed it.
Just in terms of the specific agencies that you're
Oh,
requesting
yeah.
funds from, like has discretionary funds from like a congressional office been explored?
Yeah, I mean, for this one, I would assume not, just based on the history we ran through. I think we typically go through agencies because that's sort of our mandate.
Yeah, we're talking about the city budget.
And so, yeah, because it's, but I don't know if we've ever. Have we, I'm not aware of any instance where like we received a response from an agency that left us wanting more, and then we went to a state assembly person or a congressional representative. I guess that's theoretically an option, but I think we don't have the same level of access and sort of entitlement to the city budget as with these agencies. Brian, am I?
And sometimes, agencies will say, reach out to your local elected official, for, funding or a particular request. But, in this case, we're talking about an expense request, and that's usually more for capital, budget requests. But yeah, so we're talking about the city budget and Jesus, if you wish to chime in with us as well.
Seems to me
I
that,
heard my name.
Oh, I was just saying, if you'd like to chime in, Jesus, respond.
If I'm being perfectly honest, I actually think John's suggestion of potentially scrapping this and maybe using the next few months to sort of create a better request is very sensible. I mean, it does seem like there's some uncertainty as to what specific thing is being asked for here. If that's the case, then how do we advocate for something we're not even sure what we're asking for? We won't, essentially. So it'll be there and it won't go anywhere. So I don't see how that's useful. And that's sort of with these requests, yes, there are some requests that are going to be, big lifts, others that are going to be easier, but all of them kind of have to be clear. And we need to know what we're asking of the agency so that the agency themselves can know what they're being asked for and whether they want to do it or not. You know, there is always that element. You know, there could be the best request in the world, the clearest request in the world, the most persuasive request in the world. If the agency is just not, that's not in their plan, there may not be anything we can do, but it all starts with, is this clear? And I'm not sure this is.
Yeah, so just, to continue my theme of relying extremely heavily on the CD6 staff. So if we do, close this out tonight, there's no board action required, right?
No, you'll say, well, first of all, you will recommend that this be removed. You don't remove it right now, unilaterally. And then it'll go to the budget committee and they will see that for whatever reason or the other, you request that you recommend this be removed. And then in October, when it goes to full board, the entire list of requests, some of them will be new, some of them will remain from previous years, and some of them will be from previous years, but their committees would have requested, and there are already a few of them like that, to remove them. At that point, once they're voted on, then they're removed. So they're, in theory, maybe the budget committee will say, well, no, this really must stay on. And then if you want to fight with them on that, you can, but it's very unlikely that something like that would happen. But you would recommend as a committee, because they trust that you know your subject matter better than a broader committee would. And so you recommend whether to keep this or whether to let it go.
It's always a longer process than you think. Are there any motions from the floor, perhaps?
I don't think we need a motion, but what's our deadline for getting this submitted
The 30th.
of this month?
Yeah.
We probably won't produce anything.
Yeah. I personally.
I agree that, I mean, the budget requests should probably follow our policy interest. So, our policy interest was, homeless kids not being provided services. If there's a budget request that revolves around that, it would make sense. But
You don't think I think we need to vote on this committee, right? With the recommendation or not?
I don't believe that the committee has to take a vote because we're just, again, making a recommendation that will later be.
But I'll make a motion if you want.
It doesn't, look, this process, the board has yet to sort of write it down in stone in it. And so each committee kind of decides upon these things in their own way. If you think that there is not unanimous agreement to act one way or the other, then you probably should take a vote. If through acclamation, you can decide what to do with this thing, then you can just do it that way.
Let's take a vote just to be clear, so it's on the record too. Can I vote for this? I keep looking at you, Stu.
Lawyers are so annoying.
I'm not billing for anything.
So are we saying that we don't really know what this recommendation is?
I think, so I guess I can make the motion, but I would move to recommend to remove this budget request due to its lack of specificity, with the understanding that we will endeavor to put in a new budget request to address the issue of homeless students. Are there any objections to that? Very long motion? No? Okay. Forever memorialized. All right, one request down. Great. How many do we have?
3, so,
Okay.
the second.
Brian, do you need a second on that? I think you need.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Okay. Thank you.
Since we are taking minutes.
Yeah. So the second is increasing funding for ACS preventive services, and you can see here CB6 requests funding be enhanced for ACS preventive services that allow families to remain together. I believe this would be while maintaining the welfare of the children in the home. We understand these programs are effective in preventing children from entering foster care and can include services such as family or individual counseling, parenting classes, substance abuse treatment, domestic violence intervention, home care, and support for pregnant and parenting teens, among others. However, this funding must be coupled with additional staff and better training for caseworkers to ensure children's safety.
Jeff, you can truly leave too. I know this may not be riveting.
Don't want to be rude.
No, no,
It's a
it's not at all.
curiosity.
You're welcome to stay if you're interested.
In this case, clearly, this is directed towards ACS, and that's really ambiguous. And the current year response, OMB supports the agency's position as follows. This request has already been funded.
You know, I think the issue with this is like, there's no metric by which to gauge success. It's so, yeah, increased funding, I mean, okay. With all due
If I'm-
respect.
So the agency is saying that this is taken care of essentially. I was in a meeting with ACS a couple of weeks ago, and this matter came up. And knowing that this was on your budget requests, I asked them, and they were able to offer that over the past 3 fiscal years, demand for this particular service has been decreasing. And they're serving fewer and fewer families. So, you know, it seems like the request is no longer useful if, you know, we should asking for more of this service when the demand is actually going down.
That's incredibly helpful to know. Thank you. And thank you for keeping in mind this request. I was going to mention some new business, but I've been talking to ACS too about there's some new policy changes where they're focusing more of a preventative approach. And I think they're going to come in hopefully in October, possibly November. I just want to give you all a heads up. I would suggest that we close this one out too, but I am very open to any discussion about it.
And just as an aside, the office will always try its best to, whenever we're in, you know, because we're in meetings with agencies and elected officials, and, you know, perhaps more frequently than the members are. And we will always try to keep things whenever there's time and it's appropriate and bring these things up. But, you know, when there are 60 of them, it's a lot harder to do. So again, that's why less is more, perhaps, is more effective.
You're shepherding us along so beautifully. Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion to recommend to remove this request.
It actually should be one of us in this.
You're right.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Because
Robert's rules are a fake thing.
because we're, yeah. So I'll move that we close this out and we consider the issue with greater forethought for the next year.
I forget if I can second that.
I
No.
can second.
You're the chair.
I just don't.
You're supposed to be.
Actually, you can though. You can make a motion as a chair.
I don't believe Roberts will, Roberts would discourage that.
Hey, Sue, do you want to weigh in here?
You can. It's probably better for someone else to, but you can.
I don't agree with that, but I mean, he can expedite certain sort of procedural matters, but I don't believe he can make a motion on anything that has that kind of substance.
All right, sorry to instigate that.
We need to look it up.
In the future, I won't. If it keeps
Robert's
doing it.
Rules, I have my copy of Robert's Rule right here. It's a 700+ page book. That is so dense. It actually, they don't, in the index, you'll be happy to know, it doesn't go like by simple page number like a normal book goes. It sort of goes like chapter and verse like the Bible does. So it's just to make it extra difficult to read. So we can look.
States couldn't get any deeper. The Robert's Rules. Third request
Right,
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't actually take a vote on
we did, yeah.
that.
We agreed.
Yeah, any of those in opposition to Stewart's motion? Seeing no votes, we'll recommend. Brian, just a logistical question. Is there anything I have to do to formally make the recommendation to remove these requests? Should I put it in writing to the office?
No, you don't need to. We have this,
Oh, so it's
Meeting.
this.
yeah.
Okay, great.
We're gonna update the official budget request Airtable that is on the website. We're gonna indicate that the committee, we're gonna tag it as for removal, and we're gonna indicate a note. Brian is gonna indicate a note that the committee agreed to remove this at its meeting on September 24th. And that will be enough for the budget committee to go on.
Excellent.
Is there a value attached to that, that this one is being removed because it seems to be accomplished compared to the other one that's being removed because of the structure of the request?
We can add that level of detail.
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you would like.
No, curious, just how
No, it's-
success is tracked.
I think it's a great point. Is it beneficial to you guys too, or is that just more work?
I mean, it's just a few extra words. I mean, we're not writing War and Peace here. But I think that kind of detail may be more useful to you guys as a committee. But, you know, since you are using this Airtable as well, I hope you are anyway, it doesn't hurt to have that level of specificity in there.
I would say we could also,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll
note
make
that
sure
in the
it's
minutes.
minutes.
No, it's a really great question. All right, number
And
three.
typically what we
Sorry.
do, even if we keep the notes succinct, like we do try to keep it super succinct, we try to always link a time-stamped link to the video where this discussion took place. So if someone in the future wants to go back and look and get more nuance, they can just click and they'll listen to the conversation and they'll get it from there. So there's always that. We try to make the notes as helpful, as succinct, but also as helpful as possible.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Shall we bravely venture on, Brian?
Sure. So we have security system for PS 116.
Oh, I thought this
So-
one was closed out.
So this was on continued support, I should
Oh,
say.
I think we should close this one out. So I talked to the head of the PTA at PS 116. They said it was updated. I thought I emailed about this over the summer, but maybe that's like completely.
We
imaginary.
did, we did, and at that point, you had reached out to someone at the school, but at that point, they had not yet reached back out to you, and we never heard after that.
Oh,
But if
so
you've
this
heard,
was
if you've
all-
heard that it's been resolved, then great, it's been resolved and doesn't need to be on the list anymore.
Yeah, I'm happy to forward the response, and I apologize for not closing that loop, but yeah.
That's okay, we believe you.
You're speaking for all of us, right?
Yeah. Capital W, you, and we believe you.
Yes, I believe him.
Thank you.
Though maybe he is a lawyer, maybe I shouldn't.
Probably not.
We have a parliamentarian, by the way, don't we? Didn't Sandy appoint someone?
I heard there was talk of appointing someone. I never heard an official pronouncement. But a lot of things go on in full board that sometimes I don't catch everything.
It's funny too. Okay, I think this sort of concludes our budget discussion, unless anyone else has anything further.
Was that third one formally recommended for removal
No?
by the committee?
They're both on it. I think I raised like a dangerous
I
precedent.
will
here.
propose that, that be stricken from the request.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Seeing no objections. Jesus keeping us honest. That's great.
But it's only for
Um,
your benefit, so that no one feels that their voice wasn't heard, and you know that it's a little clunky, but it's there for our benefit.
You're right. You are right. And I'm being impatient, so I apologize. So we have a few items left for discussion. Again, in the spirit of taking this completely out of order, Dave, you emailed me about the Student Omni program. And there's been some recent,
I was gonna say, there's been some
Interest.
development.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you want to sort of just give the committee
Sure.
an overview, and if there's future action, I think we would love to sort of like empower you to run with it.
Sure, absolutely. So this year, the DOE and MTA changed student Metro cards. Previously, students who lived a half a mile or more from their school received a Metro card that was good on school days between 5:30 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. for 3 swipes a day, as it was. With the advent of Omni, they have moved to Omni cards, but also broadly expanded the program to give students 4 taps a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So every day that you're a student with the Metro card, Omni card, you could tap 4 times a day. And the sort of hype around it and the excitement is that this allows students not only to go to and from school, but potentially to internships, to museums, to explore the city. There you go. And to really enjoy the benefits of the city and to become sort of educated public transit users and become a part of it. I'm going to be generous, I think, and say I think this is an unintended consequence, because I do believe that. This is great. It's opened up the city for millions of students, but there are students who live less than a half mile from their schools who are not included in this program. Presumably because they don't need the transportation to school, but they're being cut off from these new benefits, which are clearly not just about getting to school, because they're all summer long and they're all 24 hours a day and, more swipes than needed. So the question is, should we be advocating for all students to receive this Metro card? I think so. It's turned out that since I brought it up to you, that our elected officials have also jumped on this issue. There's been a number of petitions in the community, so it's been raised issues, and everyone we know, Keith Powers, our congresspeople, other city council members, state senators have all, not all, but many, signed on to a letter to the chancellor for the short foreseeable future, the next couple of days, and the CEO of the MTA, calling on them to correct this oversight, really. I don't think doesn't seem to have been designed to exclude students. This also incidentally excludes not only students who live less than half a mile from their school, but students in special needs programs who are transported by bus to their schools are also ineligible for Metro cards in the old system, and that's carried over to the new system. So I don't know that there's much to do since the elected officials are on it, except to say perhaps that it would be worthwhile to have a resolution on the record supporting this request for correction to the system or an expansion of the system. I will say the initial press statements from the MTA were asked the DOE, and the DOE's answer was, we'll consider this in future iterations of this system, which doesn't sound like, ooh, that's a good point, let's fix this. It sounds like, next year. And I think because it's only September and because there are a lot of students who are missing out on an incredible opportunity, that it might be worthwhile, we can discuss it, to support our elected officials' request, on behalf of the children in our community.
Yeah, that's so well said. I think John knows, engaging with Keith Powers today. This subject came up, and I just want to underscore how important it is and how many parents he has heard from on this issue. I have 3 kids all in high school. This is an issue also because of things like sports practices. They're not always at a facility that's connected to the school, and I can vouch for that. It's so important to give them the same extension as everyone else has on this. I would love to make a motion to support what the elected officials have so eloquently addressed on this, and what you did as well.
I think that's a great idea. I know we're meeting, I think October 24th is the next, somewhere around there. Would you feel comfortable preparing a resolution and we can work on it together for us to vote on?
Yeah, I'm happy to try to draft.
I think it can be
Use a template.
page,
Right.
yeah. There's a great.
I mean, the good
template
news
on the
is they
website.
did the work, so it's really
Yeah.
whereas all these points and we, support the request.
The kind of unfortunate things, there may be more developments in the interim.
Right.
Unfortunate for our purposes, fortunate hopefully
Right, for the
for
cause.
students. So we can, I think, sort of workshop it as necessary. I'm just thinking that we'd vote it in at the November meeting, hopefully. Which I think would be great. I'll send you a note after this. Sure. So we can sort of.
We're happy to try to address.
Yeah, it'll be a natural at it, I think.
We practice, yeah.
Yeah, so you already did one with all the other, the last, and Kevin, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we've talked about this a lot, the discussion of social media, and its impact on youth mental health. We brought in some speakers. I think last March, it's escaping me, but,
May.
I did sort of, May?
Yeah.
Good to hear. We. I'm not aware of necessarily any developments in this space, nor am I aware of any developments from the Adams administration regarding, his administration as Commissioner of Health have released guidelines on smartphone usage, how this affects kids' access to social media, and which is all sort of packaged together in an attempt to benefit youth mental health, which I think is a great initiative. I'm not aware of any updates on it. Kevin, you may.
I do have a few. I've been pretty in depth on this summer, and I'll try to make this short. Certainly studies have shown consistently more and more that social media has increased the rate of teenage eating disorders, anxiety, depression, despair, and suicide. Now, on Friday in California, Governor Newsom did sign legislation to guard children against the dangers of social media addiction, as he called it, and negative impact on their mental health. The requirements include each of the tech companies that are in this space make their posts on the social media feeds for minors in chronological order. That needs to be the default. And to get out of that default, you actually need parental permission to do so. Not what the governor feels that is addictive, because the algorithms are forcing them to look at things that they know they want to continue to see more of. I know this is an issue. Another part of this legislation is no notifications to minors during school hours and also sleep hours, which was defined as midnight to 6 a.m. So clearly there are some developments on this front. One of the groups that I have been in touch with is the Parents Network. It's an initiative that started actually last month. It was created specifically to address the dangers of online media and our children. Yesterday here in the city, part of the UN General Assembly, one of the co-founders, there were two, addressed this. That his face happens to be a Prince Harry. He displayed photos of youngsters who died because of harm from social media. And I'll conclude, just wanted to mention some of the things that he said yesterday. Quote, "Our kids are being targeted. The harmful effects of social media are made by design. These platforms are designed to create addiction. Young people are kept there by mindless, endless, numbing, scrolling, being force-fed content that no child should ever be exposed to. Our laws and regulations are different, state to state, country to country. We may have different backgrounds, viewpoints, beliefs, and even access to the internet itself, but the one thing that we can universally agree on is the safety of our children. So why do the leaders of these insanely powerful social media companies still refuse to change? Why are we holding them to the lowest ethical standards?" I would love to think we're going towards some sort of a resolution. I think more research needs to be done, but I would be more than happy to take a lead on crafting something that we can address at the next monthly meeting.
That'd be fantastic. That's great. I mean, the fact you've already prepared some notes.
Well, I mean, the Parents Network is an important step.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fantastic. I'm gonna send each of you guys with quote unquote homework assignments notes, just so we're all on the same page, but that sounds great. You also sent me a great note earlier today about the IESP, the individual plans. Do you want to just share a little bit?
Yeah, it might be a systematic problem. So basically, this is the program that gives kids everything from extra time on tests because they have, it could be attention deficit disorder, but the Department of Education always determines who gets these benefits. Another one is speech therapy, and I can personally say there's been kids that have been helpful. The issue is that parochial schools and private schools, which have always been part of this program, the parents wanted to renew what their children have already been doing for years, and they can't in the system get approval to continue these services. Crazy. So spoke with Keith today, Councilmember Powers. He did say that he's been hearing from a lot of parents on this. He said the DOE has asked him to have any individuals, parents, send him any individuals, or if there's a school list that the school can prepare to make things a little more efficient for his office. And he said, going forward, please keep his office informed of any issues with this. He says the DOE looks like they're going to approve this to continue, but he can't say that yet. All he's been asked for the DOE is send us your individuals and send us a list. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna be approved.
Right.
So that's where we are now, and thank you for bringing that up.
Can we include something on CV6's website or an email blast about this?
I'll defer to Jesus, but I know we have, in the past, included, surveys and, some of our newsletters.
I was more, we could do a survey. I was more even thinking just, if you're affected by this, send it into Keith. But we could do our own. I was thinking something simpler, I think, but.
Let me just look at how Keith worded it, if I could. Make sure I'm accurate on this.
That federal law, especially the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires
Yeah.
states to provide those services to students in private schools.
Yeah, so there have been abuses also that we do need to take some cognizance of.
So to be clear, it's. Response, no response from DOE yet, except that they're asking to send them names individually of a school list so people can reach out to my office if they're having issues. And he added that if they want to send that list to his office, we can do that as well. It's more efficient, but we can send it to DOE or Keith's office of any of those people that are infected. I know with I live in Stuytown. I know there's a Stuytown parents group. They're already posting about this
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
Maybe that's right. You're in Stuytown too. So it's an issue.
I was wondering if we can just do, trouble with the IESB, contact Keith.
Well, again, they said we can contact the DOE directly. So.
Yeah, better, probably, yeah. I will email on that thread, I'll just forward it to Jesus and re-up it with Sandy and see.
And just, part of the problem, I say it's a systematic problem. Parents are always notified before the deadline. Either this year they weren't notified at all, or when they did, were notified, it was after the deadline and when they went in to try to. But there's even an issue with people that before the deadline tried to renew and weren't approved. So it might just be a flaw in the software.
Yeah.
Are there legitimate reasons to not continue someone who has, not, i.e.
SP?
Thank you.
No, I mean, I brought up one that, people giving extra time on tests because the DOE has, through this program, has authorized that need extra help. I don't know if you're familiar, because you're more closer to the, schools, but that's a big issue for a lot of kids with legitimate reasons that they need extra time on tests.
Right, I'm asking, are there legitimate reasons to remove somebody who has had?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's what you're.
Why the renewal?
You're talking about the, I can't think of
I
any,
think you
unless
you
they're,
have to do it with
misusing.
the parent. There has to be a committee that decides that the child is no longer eligible for the service. It's a highly regulated process.
Very, like aging out, I assume, but I don't know.
I'm sure asking the question, why do parents have
Yeah,
a
like
burden of
once you
renewing
graduate.
every year,
Yeah, I don't know what
right? It
else.
seems,
Yeah, well, the burden of renewing.
seems
sounds-
extra.
It seems like it's designed to force people to fall through the cracks.
right.
But, there are also abuses, and I'm wondering if that has anything to do with it.
I haven't heard it.
I mean, you have to go through a whole process to get these services to begin with. You have to be evaluated. The whole, like the parents and a committee within the school has to develop a plan that's right for that student, they gives that student access to, it's called free and appropriate education.
And when you
So-
reapply, does it go through the whole process again? If you,
The plan does have to be updated, but I think it's every 3 years. It can be modified within those 3 years, but I think the plans have to be updated every 3 years. So it should be, like, parents should receive like notice, like way in advance, if anyone is thinking about discontinuing it, and the parent would have to agree to that.
And there are teachers already designated for schools in these non-public schools to do these services. So take speech therapy. If you have a child that started speech therapy last year, chances are, and that's what parents want, to go back to the same speech therapist. So there's potentially, in theory, a teacher sitting there unable to teach if these are not renewed.
It's a high impact issue. And one we should try to help with. Thank you for raising it.
Sure.
Barring any further discussion, I'm gonna waive my chair's report. If any member of the committee has any old or new business, please raise your hand. Otherwise, if there's a motion to adjourn,
motion to adjourn.
excellent. No objections, will adjourn. And seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
At
Thank you.
8:20.
8:20.